Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class. We are studying the latter part of chapter 23 of Exodus, and this has to do with God's directions on how to invade the Promised Land. So let's go over this again. We were studying this last week, and we really didn't have time to get into as big a discussion as we needed to, probably, on the understanding of what the invasion of Canaan was all about. So let's take a look again, beginning at verse 23 of chapter 23. When my angel goes in front of you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I blot them out, you shall not bow down to their gods or serve them or follow their practices, but you shall utterly demolish them and break their pillars in pieces. Okay, now what is God saying here? God is saying that God, will blot them out. All right, how does God blot them out? Is there like a volcano or an earthquake, or is there a flood? How does God wipe them out? How does God intend to blot them out? God's people are going to do it. Okay, He's making His people do it. All right. Generally speaking, historically, anytime there has been a genocide in human history, somebody's God is blotting out somebody else using God's people or whatever authorities there might be. You know, in Rwanda, there was a genocide against the Tutsi tribe by the Hutus. The Hutus were more socialist, communist led, and they went and hacked their neighbors to death. Generally speaking, most of the killing was done by machete and knives, clubs, and things like that. They didn't have the arms, but we're talking about a lot of people getting killed. In the instance of Cambodia, when Pol Pot was committing genocide in his own country, it was a communist-led revolution, and Pol Pot's communist ethic entitled him and his people to commit genocide against other Cambodians, and thousands died. Mao Zedong, same thing, Cultural Revolution. There are people who are intellectuals who need to be moved out of the way, using the authority of the communist religion, that's what it is. They wiped out millions of people. Stalin did the same thing.
So what did you say God's position was at the very beginning? You said
whatever the authority is for genocide. In many cases, in recent history, most of the genocides are being committed by communist or socialist states. Nazi Germany was a socialist state. But in times past, generally religion was used as an excuse to annihilate other people. Okay, Billy and I were talking about that earlier with the Crusades. When the Crusaders entered Constantinople, which, by the way, was Christian, it was just Greek Orthodox, it was Roman Orthodox. The Roman Catholic Church sanctioned the annihilation of the population of Constantinople.
Would the same be true back in the Vikings days when the pagans and the Christians
Yes.
were fighting in the name of a god?
Yes, they're fighting in the name of the god, and one of the reasons why they use the excuse to annihilate is that they felt like the other religion was going to be a corrupting influence on them. And so that was their excuse for annihilating wholesale populations.
Even didn't Hitler go through the churches to begin with to turn them against the Jews?
Yes, there was a contract made between Hitler, the Nazi Party, and the Roman Catholic Church at first, And then he co-opted the Lutheran Church. And you would find on church altars, there would be a picture of Hitler instead of a cross in Nazi Germany. So he was,
Didn't he demand his picture be put?
yes, he did. And churches would comply. Okay?
You had England, you had Bloody Mary.
You had Bloody Mary. That's right. Catholic queen. And you had Queen Elizabeth, who didn't like Catholics too much. So one of the reasons why the concept of freedom of religion was ingrained into the establishment of this country was because of the excesses of religion in Europe. There was so much religious persecution going on in Europe that we did not want that to happen in the new country. And because we didn't want it to happen, we wrote into our Constitution that there would be a definitive division between church and state. And that people had freedom to worship under federal law. Initially, under the 1781 Constitution, people had the freedom to worship the way they wanted to. Now, I don't know how many, what percentage of the states existed at the time of the Constitution, but quite a few of them had state religions that were associated with the state of Massachusetts, for instance. Especially under the leadership of Thomas Jefferson, the states began to realize that they ought to adopt the federal policy, that there could be no state religion. So people were paying taxes to the state, and it was going to the state church. In Massachusetts, it was the Congregational Church.
So the state church was the government.
Yes. Yes, the state church it was an agency of the government. Okay? And what you got to be really careful of is when the government becomes an agency of the church. Because the government usually has the means to destroy opposition. The church, in and of itself, outside of Rome, doesn't typically have its own militias, armies, things like that. Those are usually government agencies. In the case of the Roman Catholic Church, Rome was and is a nation. And over the course of history, it has raised its own armies, fought its own wars, things like that. But usually very closely allied with the prince or the king. Okay? So they're going in and they're going to utterly blot out the populations that exist in Canaan, which is the promised land. And they're doing it because God is saying, I'm doing it. And you're just going to be following my orders. Okay? Throughout human history, this problem is, for us, in modern history, we have to be very careful that this model from the Old Testament doesn't become our model or our excuse as well. Okay? God says in 27, I will send my terror in front of you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. Okay, and I will send swarms of hornets in front of you, which shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. Well, I'm not sure that happened. Okay, there's a prediction. There isn't much of a record of that taking place during the invasion of Canaan.
Mine doesn't. Mine just says I will send terror ahead of you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What translation is that?
New Living Translation.
The New Living Translation. Okay.
The one that's written in elementary language.
That's correct. Okay. It's actually the Living Bible is not actually a translation.
I know. We've had that conversation before.
Yes. Okay. But that's okay. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild animals multiply against you. Okay, here's the problem. They don't have the capacity to simply take over. So God says, okay, the invasion is going to be a gradual thing. So they're not all going to leave at one time, because that would leave the fields barren, and that would leave the cities unoccupied and the industry not existent, and, so if you simply annihilate all these people, it's something like Russia invading Ukraine right now. Let's say they win. What have they won? They've destroyed everything.
They got the land.
Yeah, whoop-de-doo,
That's a good point, Dennis.
They just,
Didn't they have the land anyhow? Wasn't it, one time,
At one time, it was part of the Soviet Union, very much. Okay? It's kind of interesting that since they broke off from the Soviet Union, they seem to be a lot more adaptable, innovative, no less corrupt. Okay? They got a long way to go on the corruption thing. But I've been following, what the Ukrainians have been able to do against a vastly superior, supposedly, army, and they're just really striking terror in the Russians. It's just awful. I watched a tank column get destroyed. 31 tanks. Now, Russian tanks. Yeah, 31 Russian tanks. And normally, with an artillery strike, you're going to see a hit, and then they would say, okay, you need to correct over here. And after about 3 shots, you kind of get into where you want to be. That's traditionally how artillery works. These tanks were blowing up. 1 tank, 2 tanks, 3 tanks, every one of them was a direct hit. So it's compliments of United States, but a lot of innovation from the Ukrainians on how to use drones and things like that. They're highly motivated. The Russians, not so much. So it's just interesting to see how sometimes you can, you think you've got it all. I mean, the Russia thought they would be all the way through Ukraine in a week or two, and sorry about that, Ivan. It's just not going to work.
Well, the Ukrainians are fighting for their land.
Yes.
For what they own. The Russians are being shipped over there to fight a war that they don't really want.
For their land. Okay? The Ukrainians have been under the Russian thumb before. The Ukrainians have been annihilated in vast quantities by Stalin, by Russian leaders. They've had their crops stolen. Their people have gone through mass starvation because of Russian policies. And they have a long history of not liking Russian control. So it's not just their land, it's their very lives that they're talking about. Because what Russia is attempting to do really is a form of genocide. And so it's, there will be no Ukrainians. If Putin wins, there will be no Ukrainians, they will all be Russian.
Do they have a religion in Ukraine?
Yes, they have the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Is it sort of Lutheran?
No, it's an offshoot of the Greek Orthodox Church, which is an offshoot, and the Russian Orthodox Church is an offshoot of that. There are a lot of different Orthodox Christian religions, very similar to Catholicism, with some significant differences. But you have Serbian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, Croatians are Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox. There are a lot of different versions of Orthodoxy, but when you get into them breaking down, you're going to find that they're closely aligned with nations. It's a nationalist. For a long time, the Orthodox religions were the state religions, essentially. So that's why there are variations.
Dennis, the Orthodox, my understanding is if I say that I'm an Orthodox Christian, my understanding is that Orthodox means that you are a biblical, you believe biblically.
Yes, but it is also the nomenclature. It's just like there is a Church of God. Okay, well, aren't we? Okay, so Orthodoxy can be a nomenclature for a version of Christianity,
Okay.
But Orthodox also means that you conform to traditional
Yeah.
Christianity,
That's what I thought.
okay? It's not just Bible, it's tradition as well. So when you say I'm an Orthodox Christian, you say I conform to Christian tradition and belief. Like, for instance, the Apostles' Creed,
Yes. Yes.
okay? God makes a promise here also that when they invade, God will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from you. No one shall miscarry, be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. Well, those are, what we're seeing here are promises made by God ostensibly if people will commit genocide. So this is an enticement to commit genocide. Okay,
He's
now,
bribing them.
huh?
He's bribing them.
Yes.
You
That-
think the Lord is bribing the people?
Well, he's telling them, I'm gonna give you this if you do this.
It's not, well, bribing someone implies that you're asking them to do something that is illegal or corrupt. God is not trying in this instance to corrupt them. He is talking about genocide as a means of purification, actually.
Yeah, that's what,
But he's already given them the Ten Commandments, and it says thou shalt not kill.
yes.
Yes, but that's murder. But if God sanctions it, is it murder?
Oh, my Dennis.
Okay. Well, this is a central discussion because there is so much in the Pentateuch and in the following books of the Bible, Joshua and Judges, that focuses with how do you retain your purity? To what extent do you proselyte other people into your faith community? Okay? And there's a problem. There's a problem. If we take the biblical model, the Old Testament biblical model. I don't know if I can get this whiteboard. So, okay. Remember we were talking about first premises last week. What is the central justifying thing for the establishment of your people, of your nation? Okay, and the central justifying thing for Israel is the covenant with Abraham. Okay, God says, if you'll go into this land, I will give you this territory. I will give this territory to your offspring, not to Abraham, but to his offspring. And that they would occupy the land for generations to come, that his people would be like the stars of the heaven, the sands of the sea. God would bless those who blessed his people and curse those who cursed his people, and that through him and his progeny, the nations of the world will be blessed. Okay, so two motives involved in that covenant. One is, I'm going to give you the land, okay? And the second is, you're going to be a blessing. Now, the sermon last Sunday, I felt like blended right into this, because it was based on the covenant with Abraham. And why are the people of God being blessed? Are they being blessed because they are the chosen people, or are they being blessed so that through them the nations of the world can be blessed? Okay,
That's what I've always been.
that's right. Okay, so,
What did you say, Anna?
That's what I've always believed, that we are blessed to bless others, and so that the other.
This message,
yes,
What?
That was Jesus' message.
Jesus' message.
that was Jesus' message. Okay, what Jesus did was he interpreted the covenant with Abraham to have the function of the ultimate goal of God to bless the nations. God was choosing these people in order to bless the nation in the process. Okay? But in that covenant, God's ultimate goal was that all people would know the blessings of God. Okay? And they would know the blessings of God through the work of his people who had been blessed.
That they would come to desire that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now, that property thing kind of gets in the way. Okay? In order for them to be blessed with a productive territory, okay, they've got to take it away from people who live there.
That's right. Tells them all those people that are already living there, he's
Going to get rid of them.
get them.
Okay. So in order for God to ultimately bless all nations, he's got to destroy some in the process.
Did he have to destroy them, or could he just have moved them,
That's one or to a different
moved
area.
them somewhere else?
Well, there was not the provision to relocate a population.
Evidently, he had to destroy them to get rid of the corruption and the everything. Is that?
Well, okay. We look at populations now that are not Christian. Is it necessary for us to destroy them in order to open their territory for Christians to live in? Is that the only way that we're going to preserve our Christianity, is by destroying people who are not Christian?
Well, no, but I mean, we're talking about God here.
Yeah, we are talking about God here, but we're also talking about agency. What is the agency of God? And if we are the agents of God, how do we interpret that agency? How much
What he
would
says, to do what he says.
to do what he says? Okay, well, this thing says kill them all.
Yeah, and I mean, as horrible as that sounds, he had a purpose for killing them.
Well, he had to get them out of the land because he's already promised that land to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's no converting them to Judaism.
No.
Because it's a bloodline.
That's correct. And this is the issue.
Way to go, Ann.
No, that's no, that
Oh, you work for Jeopardy, don't worry.
okay. How do you bless the nations? All right. We see in earlier parts of Exodus, and we will see all the way through Numbers and Deuteronomy, that the aliens who live in the land, who should have been annihilated, but the aliens who live in the land that are controlled by Jews fall under Jewish law. Okay? Which is an ethical law.
Okay, so you saying the people that lived in this land
Who survived?
prior to that,
Yeah.
they were Jews?
No.
Okay.
I'm talking about the Jews came in, took over the territory. Now they control the territory. There are residual
They're
populations.
still there because they didn't get rid of everybody.
They didn't get rid of everybody. Okay?
See if they had done what God said.
It'd be so much simpler, wouldn't it? I mean, really. But no, what they did was people who lived under Jewish territories had to comply with Jewish law. Okay? But they were not converted to Judaism.
In other words, they were not Orthodox Jews.
Isn't that sort of what the Samaritans, they intermarried?
Okay, what happened with the Samaritans was when the Assyrians displaced the Jewish population in the northern 10 tribes, okay? When they displaced those populations, carried them off into slavery, and scattered them all over, they sold them everywhere. Jews went everywhere under the Assyrians. they repopulated the land with other people that they had conquered. The Samaritans were one of those people, and they ended up in Samaria. That's how they got the name, Samaritans. And they tried to comply with Jewish law because they believed that gods were local. So they got instruction from a Jew on how to comply with Jewish law, and they were trying to assume Judaism. But because they were not racially Jewish, the Jews considered them interlopers and hated them. You can't just declare yourself a Jew. Okay? This is
But
one
at
of the
that point, you're talking about not the Jewish religion, but the
Race.
Jewish race.
Yes, correct. That's correct. Even if they followed Jude, which they had variations, they brought their own customs into it. So it was not what Jews would consider to be pure Judaism. Okay? But they still tried to assume Judaism because they were trying to respect the God of that territory when they got moved there. But you couldn't cross the line into the promise, into the chosen people. You couldn't choose yourself to be a chosen people. So that was the main bone of contention with the Samaritans, and it led to all kinds of hostilities.
And did the Jewish people, when they were telling the Samaritans how to live under the Jewish law, would they always?
No, these were not the best,
Yeah, that's what I
most
was.
talented, because the best and most talented were carried off by the Assyrians. Okay.
So these Jewish people would tell them anything, just.
Well, they were, they probably weren't priestly class or anything like that. They were just,
Yeah, how to do the race.
yeah, this is how, we worshiped and,
Yeah.
but in terms of being experts on the law and that sort of thing, those people were all sold. So, but that's one of the problems that you have. This is supposed to be a godly religion that is supposed to bless all the nations, with the proviso that only these people would be the chosen people. So they would always be predominant. They would always be in a separate class, an upper class. They would always be in a position to tell other people how they should live, without all the benefits of being God's chosen people. Okay? Now, this is what the Apostle Paul argued against, because there was a strong movement within Christianity to demand that people convert first to Judaism before they could become Christian. And Paul said, no, we're not going to have the racial divide in Christianity. Peter's vision tore down the division between Jew and Gentile when God told him to eat non-kosher food. Okay? So it was a very, very tough sell for the early church. We're talking about the disciple early church, to accept people who were not Jewish into their movement. Very hard to do. Now, what was Paul?
They were elitist.
They were elitist, okay. Now, what Paul was saying is that through God's people, all the nations of the world would be blessed, and that meant that all the nations of the world could be accepted into this faith and be treated equally. And he said, what was the standard that God used in accepting Abraham? Was it that he was faithful? Okay? So Paul says the standard for acceptance into being part of the chosen people of God is that you are faithful, that you believed God, and that was counted to him as righteousness. And so therefore, if you believe God, then it's counted to you for righteousness, because Abraham was not a chosen person before that. That was Paul.
He wasn't a good person either.
No, he wasn't necessarily. No, he was a man of the times.
Yeah, right, but you know.
He was relatively good.
Well, yeah, in the whole scheme of things, yeah.
Yeah, he was
But, you know,
relatively a lot
I have
better.
a problem with the word blessed.
Huh?
I have a problem with the word blessed,
Yes.
that this group is blessed.
Okay, yes.
That,
Now,
that word just, you know, it kind of, I don't know, it's just like somebody said, oh, I was so blessed to have a beautiful day, or to spend time with my family. I have a problem, so I wasn't blessed, you know.
okay, here's the issue. Okay? The operational definition of blessing: and
Right.
prosperity, good health, no miscarriages. Okay? These were the standards. They were tangible standards of blessing. Okay? Now, from an Old Testament understanding of blessing as imparted by inheritance, okay, you had the head of the household would impart a blessing to one of his offspring, which gave that offspring the entitlement of the family.
A blessing his heirs.
Yes. Yes. So here you have the thing between Jacob and Esau. Esau was supposed to get the blessing, but he didn't get the blessing. Jacob got the blessing.
Right.
Okay? So he got that from his father Isaac. So Isaac was supposed to pass it on to Esau and wanted to, but he was tricked. But the blessing went. It went to Jacob. Okay? That blessing is different from the blessing of prosperity. That blessing has to do with authorization. That blessing has to do with family identity. Okay? Now, if God is saying to his people, through you all the nations of the world be blessed, is he saying through you all the world's nations will be prosperous, or is he saying through you all these people will be brought into my family?
That's what I'm.
Well, see, I kind of like, I have chosen all of you.
Yeah.
You are my chosen people, and because I have chosen you, you now will go out and choose the others to be a part of my family.
And they did, along through Jesus, but not at this point.
Right.
Not at that point. Okay, it's still an issue. It's still an issue. Okay, but the understanding of what it means to receive the blessing from God the Father means that you are part of God's family.
Right.
Okay? The Jews interpreted it quite differently and did not, instead of providing that blessing and incorporating them into Judaism or into their faith, they are excluding them and killing them. And they're doing so because someone is telling them that God is authorizing this.
Who is the someone?
I think the writers. Okay, that's me. Okay.
In other words, you don't think that God told them to destroy these nations?
I don't think that God's intent to bless the nations through these people was supposed to be an act of genocide.
Right.
That was just an excuse for them to do it.
Yeah.
So,
They didn't know how to conquer a land otherwise. It never occurred to them that conquering another culture would be an intellectual or charitable process.
Well, because at that time, they didn't know about any other way of,
That's correct. This is the way things were done.
yeah.
so over the years, I mean, you wonder why they're hated. I'm a Jew and you're not.
Well,
You
that's,
know, and I'm superior, and God, it's my God
mhm.
that has said this.
Yes.
We can do this.
Oh, yeah.
Is that part of it?
I really do think that that's part of it. Okay? And when you go back to, I mean, you know, I lost family members very likely in the Holocaust in Lithuania. And, you know, I kind of look at Germany differently than a lot of people do, you know, because of that. And I think Arab cultures go back to this history and see the clash going on, and they see also a differentiation to some degree of how non-Jewish people are treated in Israel. Okay, they do have a vote, they have a lot of rights. There are some rights that they don't have. And so I can understand the resentment to a certain extent, okay? And I'm not sure that this methodology is the kind that's needed in order to bring peace among those two cultures. I just, you know, but you can go back to the Bible and say, well, this is how God told us to do it. And, you know, we should have learned some things down through the years. And we should have learned some things about the nature of God down through the years. That God is much more gracious than the Bible gives him credit for in the Old Testament. So those are, I think those are things that we need to look at and understand. I guess it's about time
It took a
to.
long time, and
Yeah.
we still haven't learned.
No, we're still not learning very well. Okay, well, let's close with prayer. Our Father, we thank you for blessings, and we thank you that you have helped us to look at the issue and to try and see it from both directions and understand it from the standpoint of ancient cultures as opposed to our own. What was acceptable in one age might not be acceptable in a more enlightened age. And though we consider ourselves more enlightened, we're still pretty stupid in the way that we deal with each other today. We still need your grace and we still need your guidance. Bless us as we proceed into the book of Exodus, for we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you for being with us today. And this topic is not going away. We got a long invasion to handle. So,
24 next week.
yes.
Well, I've been blessed with 2 apple jobs.
All right.